You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. When we talked about our day one practice report, the real big takeaway, for me anyway, was that the defense had some wins, that they punched back. It looked like a fair fight. They picked off 4 passes from LSU quarterbacks, 2 from the freshman Colin Hurley, but Ashton Stamps picked off Garrett Nussmeier, and P.J. Woodland picked off Ricky Collins. And there was a 5th that was dropped by Bernard Causey. And that was Ricky Collins as well. So they were active and made a lot of plays. But the LSU receivers and pass catchers and offense made some great plays as well. Kyren Lacy took over spring, and he picked up right where he left off. I mean, whether it was shallow crosses, he made a beautiful catch on the sideline over freshman Michael Turner that drew the ire of Corey Raymond. You feel really comfortable. The first play that we saw in 7-on-7s was a pass to C.J. Daniels over the middle. That might be my biggest takeaway in watching those receivers is, man, just seeing C.J. Daniels out there in the 4 jersey, how much he filled that uniform, how good he looked and fluid. I mean, you could tell just watching him. All right, that's a guy that looks like he belongs and was a 1,000-yard receiver a year ago, a guy that I'm really confident I can look at and say, all right, if your top 3 guys are 2, 3, and 4, or Kyren Lacy, Chris Hilton, who wears 3 now, and C.J. Daniels, that's a really good 3 and a great place to start. But Brian Kelly was asked about Kyren Lacy in particular because, as we've all talked about, that's a guy that he transferred in from ULL and just kind of had to bide his time because you had 2 first-round picks in front of him. And now it's his time.
Most of his growth has been by virtue of him being the guy, if you will, now, right? I mean, he is the veteran player. So sometimes that happens with attrition, with guys moving on. Some guys don't embrace it. They just continue to be who they are. He's embraced that and wants to be that next great wide receiver at LSU. We have such a great tradition. So he wants to live up to that standard. So it's been fun to watch that maturation.
I feel like we've always asked that question, like, who's going to be next? Like, who's going to be the next wide? Like, how are you going to replace X? How are you going to replace Odell and Jarvis's production? Well, here comes a guy like DJ Chark, who had a great career. How are you going to replace Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson? Well, you don't in particularly replace those guys, but my goodness, Kayshon Boutte blew up in 2020. He was ready. A year later, as a freshman, Malik Neighbors announced himself as the next great one, and then he carried that on for 2 seasons. Brian Thomas Jr. had to step up in a big way last year in 2023, made himself a first-round draft pick. So maybe I'm just using history as a predictive model here, but Kyren's entering his 5th year of college now. He spent 2 years with the Cajuns, and as a freshman, had 28 grabs. As a sophomore, had 22. He comes to LSU in Brian Kelly's first year, and obviously, you had a log jam at receiver, but he caught 24 balls for 268. Then last year, he catches 30 passes for 558 and averaged 18.6 yards per reception and 7 touchdowns. In his first season in Baton Rouge, he didn't find the end zone. Last year, averaged 18.6 per grab and 7 touchdowns. Like, every time he touched the ball, it seemed like it was a big play. So now that the 2 guys who are 1,000-yard receivers ahead of you are gone, it's natural that, that 30 catches should double. I mean, you should just double the targets and double the productivity. So does he go to 60 catches for 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns? Probably. I'd be surprised if he didn't. I think the bigger question is the rest of that receiver room. Because just like in 2020 as a freshman, we saw Kayshon step up. Just like in 2021 as a freshman, we saw Malik, especially after Kayshon got hurt in the Kentucky game, have a really strong finish to that year. Like, who's the guy after Kyren that's ready? Now, Chris Hilton, I went and checked my notes from last year's fall camp. Chris Hilton was one of the guys that had really developed himself last year. But look at what was ahead of him. So I look at Chris Hilton as a guy poised and ready when he gets his targets to be a really productive receiver. And C.J. Daniels clearly looks the part. What I think is probably the more interesting or challenging part for Joe Sloan is who's playing what position, right? Like, are you looking at a smaller guy like Aaron Anderson and Xavion Thomas as a slot receiver? Or do you want to create mismatches with big-bodied receivers in the slot? Like sometimes you would do with Malik Neighbors, putting him in the slot, or Brian Thomas in the slot, just to create a mismatch. So maybe that's how Joe Sloan gets creative with it. But, you know, we focus so much on the two guys from a year ago with Neighbors and Thomas, and then Kyren was at 558 yards. Well, Chris Hilton had 13 catches, and Aaron Anderson had 12. And, you know, after that, like, that was it for the wide receiver position. It was Neighbors, Thomas, Lacy, Hilton, Anderson. Those are the only five that had a reception a year ago because so much of the targets got eaten up by the top two because they were awesome. And maybe you have that happen again. Like maybe it's Kyren Lacy, Chris Hilton, and they gobble up, 150 receptions this year combined. Or maybe it's spread out a little more over 4 or 5 guys. But either way, I just don't worry about that room, man. Kyren Lacy's ready to be the guy. Chris Hilton looks poised for a big year. C.J. Daniels looks the part. And after that, gosh, I mean, when you go out to practice on day one, and in 11-on-11, the first 11-on-11 period we see, there's Shelton Sampson, former 5-star, making 2 leaping 50-50 grabs on the sideline. You go, okay. I mean, Brian Kelly, by the way, was asked about this after practice, about the day Shelton Sampson had. It was cut short when he hit his head, but like it was incredibly impressive. And that's a guy that we're talking, like, what is he, your 5th, 6th best receiver right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're looking for from him, right? His ability to go up and get the football and compete for it. He was not a 50-50 guy last year. He was a 20-80 guy. He lost 80% of those. I believe he's a 50-50 guy. I mean, he can go and get those balls. Unfortunately, he hit his head when he came down, and they wanted to be cautious that he didn't have a head injury. He was a little bit lightheaded. I was lightheaded out there today. So we hope that it's not anything serious and that he's able to bounce back tomorrow.
Remember that first day of fall camp last year when I've referenced that the cornerback receiver drills. On the first day, like Shelton Sampson ran a go route and dusted Deuce Chestnut. Had him beat by 6 yards, but he dropped the ball. Those are the kind of plays that Shelton could make because he was faster. If he got off the line, he was just faster and bigger. I mean, it's why you're a 5-star. But the contested balls, like the ones he caught on the sideline, those are the ones that are going to earn him reps, actual playing time this year. There's no shortage of options at receiver for LSU this season. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.